It is Sunday, June 1st. Happy Pride Month, everybody. It is getting pretty late with Jake Landau. I am back from the dead after 4 days of feeling not great. If you've been following me on Twitter, you know I was just in the hospital. But now I'm out, and don't worry, the podcast can't be kept down that easily. Sorry you missed me last week, folks, but we are back and we are ready to go, and we've got a great guest for you today. She is the host of the Radical Center podcast, which I've been on a couple times, and it's always a happy experience. And she is also a former school board trustee in Peel District for over 8 years. So her name is Nokha Dakroub, and it's a pleasure to have her here. Nokha, thanks for joining the program.
Thanks for having me, Jake.
No, I've already been on your show, I think 2 times now. We did one normal episode, and then you had me on for like the marathon election night coverage, and that was an endurance battle.
For sure. Election nights, we like to have, our own coverage, and it's usually a bit of an endurance battle waiting for results. This particular election was a little bit extra tough because there were so many close races and it took so long to call the election.
Oh yeah, and I mean, it does make me a little bit upset with Elections Canada versus other tiers of government, because at least in Ontario and at the municipal level and the provincial level, we have ballot counting machines. Like when I've gone to scrutineer in the past when working on elections, the results just come out like after 15 minutes when I was working on a provincial one, but then with the federal one, I'm there for 3 hours as we're going over every ballot like by hand. Like the commentary really does take a different form when you're just watching the votes be counted one at a time.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
So I wanted to have you on because I mean, obviously, like I'm a fan of you and your work and your podcast, and I want to talk about that and ask what I mean. Obviously, for you were a school board trustee in Peel for 8 years, for Mississauga wards 9 and 10. What made you want to become a school board trustee?
So I'm a social worker by background, and before I ran for the election for trustee, I actually worked in schools. I was a settlement worker in schools, and I worked with newcomers to help them learn all about the school system in Ontario. And I worked in some of the schools that I eventually got to represent a few years later for almost a decade. So I've always been involved in education, and worked in schools, and then I ended up deciding to run for office. And I ran for school board trustee. There was an incumbent at the time, and thankfully I was able to win that election unexpectedly, I would say.
Yeah, having run against an incumbent in a school board race myself, it's hard, and that's very impressive.
Thank you. And yeah, and honestly, I was really young. I was in my mid-20s, and I really had no expectations of actually winning the election. But then, slowly, through the campaign process, people started telling me, "Oh, Nokha, you're probably going to win this thing." Election night was really tough because it was really close, as you would expect with an election like that. And then we managed to make it happen. And then the 8 years that followed were some of the best years of my life and some of the most challenging years of my life. And I'm sure we'll talk all about that.
No, of course. I mean, like like being a school board trustee is an interesting experience, especially right now in this province when the provincial government doesn't seem very keen on the idea of the school boards even having elected trustees who hold them accountable on things.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we could touch upon that a little bit. There's been some changes since we left. Some of it is due to the work that we did at Peel. We were under supervision for 2 years by the ministry, which is something I advocated for a number of different reasons. So I do see the ministry right now trying to take more control of school boards. Believe it or not, I don't think that's a bad thing.
Fair.
I think that's something.
Yeah, I can agree that there can definitely be a lot of instances where school boards can be, and ultimately it is the role of the provincial government on occasion to step in when something under their purview is mismanaged. It's kind of the whole idea of having tiers of government, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also think school board is a very interesting space because, and I've been through this election several times, a lot of people just get reelected on name recognition. Most people don't know who their school board trustee is. Most people don't even vote for school board trustee.
Yeah.
So it's really hard to make that argument that, this is democracy at work when so few people are actually paying attention. So,
and that's part of why the incumbency bias is so strong, because the only, if people are voting, they usually vote for a name they remember. And because there's no parties at the municipal level, and especially not at the school board level, what else is there to vote on but the name you remember?
Absolutely. And I think also, the role itself isn't necessarily given a lot of weight. And I think, there's a lot of rules in the Education Act that make it actually really difficult for trustees to be as effective as they should be, and as effective as the community and parents expect them to be. Which makes it a very difficult role to actually be in, because you're in a situation where, a lot of decisions are not made by you.
But you're the one who has to take responsibility for them.
Yeah, and everybody's mad at you for the decisions that other people are making, and you have no recourse.
You're paid lower than minimum wage.
Yes. The time requirements are not that high. So most people don't do this as a full-time job. I had a full-time job when I was a trustee.
Yeah. But that also is another problem, because maybe managing the education system should be a full-time job.
Yeah, that is another thing. So my thing was, you either make trustees for the province, they either make trustees a real elected position where they can actually be responsible for the things that they're supposed to be responsible for, and there should be more scrutiny and there should be more attention paid to them, or they should really make them professionalize the boards and make them similar to hospital boards or police boards, where they're appointed positions, and that takes away from a lot of things. First of all, you have a lot more vetting in terms of who actually gets in, and you have people who have a professional background, rather than whoever gets elected based on some random name on the ballot, and especially when so few people actually vote in those elections.
More technocratic.
Yeah. And also, it also takes away that whole idea that, this person's responsible for X, Y, and Z, when they actually have very little to do with X, Y, and Z, and they actually have responsibilities based on, for example, a lot of parents would call me and they're upset about something that happened in a school. There's nothing I can do about that, right? The most I could do about that is call the superintendent and very nicely ask to review the matter. And the decision of the operational side of the board, we had nothing to do with that. And there's a very specific rule that says trustees are not allowed to interfere in any operations. Operations don't always go very well, right? As you can see, you hear so many things that happen in schools because things happen in schools.
And of course, the parents think, well, this is our elected official who's in charge of the schools. So if something is happening to my kid in the schools, and the school won't handle it, of course they would think the trustee is the person to go to, and yet the trustee isn't allowed to interfere in operations. But isn't the trustee supposed to oversee operations? Like, it's that
Well,
whole
that's
catch-22. It's like, are you supposed to be in charge or aren't you?
exactly, that's the catch-22, and it is a very uncomfortable position to be in, which makes people it makes the whole role even less meaningful, and it also makes people even less engaged with it, right? Because I called my trustee, and then I had a big problem, and they didn't resolve the issue, or they didn't do anything. They told me that they couldn't do anything about it. So what's the point of all of this, right? So you know
It does
the reality.
degrade democracy to an extent when people feel that no matter who you elect, nothing can be done.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there is there is a there is a reason for that. Like, you also don't really want trustees going around and making school level decisions, because that's not appropriate. But I think, if you're going to be responsible for policy only, and not have any responsibility, um, on the day-to-day stuff or any operational related issues, uh, then that constituency work part of it, then that's not necessarily a very helpful thing, because you're not able to do any real constituency work.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it feels more like the role of an ombudsperson.
Exactly. Absolutely.
And that's fine. It's like the TDS, like school boards across the province should absolutely have ombuds people that parents can take issues to. Like, but
Yeah,
that's perhaps different than the role of an elected official.
absolutely. And I think, the expectation that, things are going to get resolved just because you brought them to this person, those are just not realistic expectation.
Right.
Yeah.
And I mean, it depends, because obviously there is that sometimes there are things that happen in schools that aren't acceptable, but the school doesn't want to deal with it. And like, and occasionally, like, you do need to apply pressure in places to get these problems resolved, but it can't be the standard matter of course that, like, the education system is just run by trustees feeling the need to pursue their personal pet projects and then exerting that will over middle level functionaries in the system.
Yeah, and I agree with that also. But we'll see what the government actually does. I find that the Ford government, to their credit, they've been the most willing to actually tackle some of these issues head on. I don't know why. Maybe it's because they don't really have a lot of friends in public education to begin with, so they don't really care about upsetting some people. But also maybe because things are different now, and there's just so much more awareness about everything, and it's just
And
you
parents
can't.
are also greasy wheels too. Like,
Yeah,
well, squeaky wheels. Like, you don't want to be greased until the problem's solved. Like,
yeah, and I think also the media's paid significant more attention to issues at the school board level than they have previously. Um, and every few months we hear about some school board doing something that they shouldn't be doing, and usually the trustees are involved, and the province often has to step in or make a statement of some sort. I'm telling you, we were the appeal board ended up being under supervision after a review by the Ministry of Education, which myself and my colleague Kathy McDonald advocated for, on human rights issues and discrimination issues in the system.
right,
Um,
and that obviously it's an extreme black mark on the Peel District School Board for that to happen, but also it's good on you and your colleague for doing so and for advocating, like, for your constituents, like, in getting the province to do that. But it creates a complicated picture, because when you have two of the trustees rightly calling and saying we can't govern ourselves, you're right. It does raise some questions about how school boards govern themselves in this province. And I mean, the other example that always comes up to me is with the Catholic boards. Whenever you see like one of the Catholic boards voting that they're going to ban pride flags, and it's June 1st, so we're in Pride Month, and I'm sure we'll have another crop. I'm sure a board that's already banned them will just try and ban them again because they'll want to make. That's another problem we've had with trustees. Where have you noticed like that? Like culture warriors who are unhappy that queer people exist in schools are like, I'm going to run for the school board so that we can get the woke out of our schools. And it's always been there in the Catholic boards more for obvious reasons, but they're starting to do it in the secular board too.
Yeah, but in all honesty, from my experience, boards have been very slow to move in the right direction. Boards have been very, very slow to move in the right direction when it comes to issues on equity and diversity and just things in human rights in general. They've been very, very slow.
Oh yeah,
And we
I
can
mean
see
our country's
that.
been slow. The
Yeah, yeah.
I was a couple of years ago for Canada Day. I was in Winnipeg for the first and only time in my life, and I went to it's one of the two national museums that's outside of the capital region of Ottawa and Gatineau. It's the Human Rights Museum. So I went in there, and it's like 7 floors where you're just gradually seeing literally every terrible, horrible thing that Canada has did over our history. And then at the top, they're like, well, at least it'll probably be better in the future, right? And I thought, yeah, you know what? Sure, you tried to give me an uplifting ending after this. But then I walked out, and within 30 seconds, some blonde woman started calling me slurs.
Wow.
I so I agree. I'm unfortunately skeptical on the speed of human progress, but we do occasionally make progress. I would say things are we're having some backsliding, but I'd still rather be in the 2020s than the 1990s.
Yeah, for sure. And you know, um, people always ask me why issues always come to a head at school boards and school board meetings. And I always said, is if you really think about public education, it's the front line of progress. That's where, you know, young people, embrace ideas and test ideas and talk about things and change things.
It's where
So
we
that's why.
decide what kind of people young people become.
Exactly. Exactly. And to a certain extent, honestly, a lot of the time, from my experience, it's the young people who are making things changes. I remember some of my biggest fights at the school board, and the biggest one that I ever had was the Friday prayers fight. But yeah, I was a pretty strong advocate on that issue, but it was the students that led that whole thing.
Right, because it's I something that a lot of adults like they grow up and they kind of forget that youth do have like an innate sense of justice and fairness about things. And it's sort of why I tell parents like you can't just tell a kid because I told you so, because eventually they will lose respect for it. They need to know that there's an actual fairness and consistency in the rules around them, or at least you need to give them that for them to grow up in a healthy way. So like it's natural that like a lot of the time like youth who do have this innate sense of fairness, they come up to something that is always been tradition for us, but they're meeting it for the first time and they're like, well, wait, that doesn't make any sense at all. And then suddenly things change. And it's almost like it was never that way at all.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And it's great to see young people actually pushing for progress and pushing for change. And I think, I always thought that's why school boards are the place where you see a lot of these issues really getting discussed and sometimes fought about. But we'll see. we'll see how things shape up.
Alrighty then. Well, folks, do not go anywhere because we will come back shortly after the break. Today's episode of It's Getting Pretty Late with Jake Landau is brought to you by me. You see, folks, while all of my written articles and podcasts are available without a paywall, I need money to make them. Also, I need money to live. So, if you enjoy my content or find it informative, please consider an optional paid subscription at jakelandau.ca/subscribe. Thank you, and enjoy the show. And we are back from the break with our 3 headline topics of the week, and on the first one, the King's Speech. No, not a mediocre PG-13 movie. No, wait, I don't think it was PG-13. It was the world's weakest R-rated movie. Anyways, the King came to Canada, and apparently he's becoming slightly more popular, but not with me. He gave a speech because Mark Carney thought that he should give a speech to instead of the Governor General, which is allowed. It's what the Governor General does instead of the King. I don't know. Nokha, how do you feel about the monarchy? Because I'm kind of the pretty ardent Republican.
Yeah, I'm not a monarchist by any measure. I think that role or that time perhaps is something we can move away from. But a lot of Canadians seem to still like the monarchy and still have some attachment to it. I used to have stronger views on this. I don't really anymore. I think we have much bigger issues, and I don't think getting rid of the monarchy will.
I agree on that. It's like, it's not, I would never say that we need to like drop everything right now and like focus immediately on reformatting into a republic. But at the same time, it's like, I do like when Quebec, like the other day, just votes a motion to sever all ties with the British monarchy. And it's very pointed that they call it the British monarchy instead of the Canadian monarchy, but I do get the point being made. But it's right. It's like, I know like commentators, I think, were saying that the monarchy was a unifying figure, and I'm like, are you sure about that? Like, go to Quebec and ask how unifying the monarchy is.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, in terms of his visit and the throne speech, at a time like this when we're facing a big threat to our sovereignty, it's nice of the King to come by and visit and reaffirm that Canada, has a head of state.
I'll give that to him, especially because I know he's very sick right now, and he's really taken off a lot of he mostly isn't doing royal duties. I'll give him credit on that also, because I know the British government didn't want him to do this, and I respect the fact that he is trying to show that he is indeed legitimately the King of Canada in equal measure. The problem is, this strengthens the institution of the monarchy, and I don't want to strengthen that institution. It's another thing. It's one thing to say we can't get rid of it right now, but I don't want it to become stronger.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think the popularity that's rising right now is just a product of the time, and I think eventually that's going to change.
True, but that is reactionary in a sense, and I really don't like the idea that we're just like, well, we can't be Americans, so we should hide behind Britain's leg instead. It's just, I don't. The Britain is not Canada. Like, the monarchy is not Canada. It is not what it feels like we're like an imperial nostalgia in a sense. And do we not have our own symbols at this point?
I think we have some, but again, it's one of those things where maybe this is probably going to make the King slightly more and the monarchy is slightly more popular, and that might last some time, because people will remember that when we needed them, they were there, kind of thing.
And I mean, in a way, like, yeah, like he gave a speech, like, and like, it took a lot to come out and give the speech, like, given his consideration, mind you, but I don't know that this is what will make or break Canada. I think there have, frankly, been a lot of other things that have contributed. I think the hockey game we beat America in contributed far more to our psychological resilience than this man's speech.
Yeah, I can agree with that for sure.
But I guess my main complaint about it also, though, the speech in particular, is there was just a lot of positioning that this speech is for Trump because Trump respects King Charles and the monarchy and the institution. And if Charles says that Canada's not for sale, then Canada's not for sale. And then Trump just immediately posts after that he's going to make us the 51st state and include us in the Golden Dome.
Yeah.
So,
exactly.
Which is exactly what I knew would happen. I was like, I don't think this, but I don't think it was ever actually for Trump. I apparently, Mark Carney's brother, Sean Carney, it works at Kensington Palace.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, well, like he works in a capacity for the royal family. I believe it might be for the Prince and Princess of Wales. So, so I have a feeling that this speech happened for the primary reason that Mark Carney is a monarchist, and he wanted the king to give a speech.
Potentially. Yeah.
Like,
I think it has something to do with Trump. I really do. I think it's because, the king did make the time to actually do this.
Did. Oh, yeah. I mean, obviously, like, the opportunity came, like, because of everything surrounding our sovereignty, and I think the king came for good reason, but I think Mark Carney was also just really excited to get to see the king speak.
Yeah. I mean, I can understand that, if you're a brand new prime minister and you've got a king over there, like it's myself being not a monarchist, I can still understand the excitement that could come with that.
I get it. His brother just is funny to me. It does make me, is like, does he come from a monarchist family? Like, is that a thing? How do you end up working for the royal family? I mean, I know how you do it. Like, it's a job working for, like, wealthy people, nobles are not, have private staff, of course, but like it's just, it's a very weird kind of job to have because they're pretending they're anointed by God. And these are not humble people.
Yeah, I mean,
even for rich people, these are not humble people.
Yeah, again, I'm certainly not a monarchist, and I think, not just in Canada or Britain, just around the world, I think it's something that, 2025, as humans have evolved and made so much progress, we can move away from ideas of being extra special.
Like the idea that some humans are above others. Like,
yes. I've moved away from that, so I don't find that very very enticing.
I know, it's like, and if we're going to pick like cultural heritages of Canada, like, I'm partial to France, liberté, égalité, fraternité. Like, we are all free, we are all equal, and we are all together. Like,
and the other thing, just on the Trump note, I mean, if Carney was trying to make that point, which I personally think he is, it's kind of a funny point to make, right? Like, I get that. Yeah,
it's like, you can't buy us because Britain already owns us.
Yeah.
Like, that's part of what made it feel gross to me. It's like, it's not us asserting our sovereignty. It's us
Yeah.
borrowing another country's symbol because we don't, like, we can't just say we're free because we say so.
Yeah, and I think, that necessarily doesn't send the right message even to Trump, and that's probably why he doesn't really care, because in his head it's like, well, if we're closer to you, so why don't you just be a part of the US? So yeah, but I think in general, like to Canadians, because there's a threat, because there has been a lot of emotion around this, and rightfully so. It could certainly land, as they were there for us when we needed them the
Right.
most. And
Yeah.
if he didn't show up, then
Yeah, I understand. The situational context certainly does increase support. And that, although one thing that I really hated was polling that showed a bunch of Canadians who said that they support the monarchy because it sets us apart from the US as a republic. And I'm like, I hate that question. And I'm like, the US is not bad because they're a republic. The US is bad because they're arguably no longer a republic.
Yeah, and I think, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I don't think.
And it's like France is a republic, Ireland is a republic, South Korea is a republic. There are lots of 2/3 of the Commonwealth are now republics. It's like, it's a great form of government. They're parliamentary republics. We could just have the governor general, call them the president instead. They're not elected. Just have all the MPs pick them once every 7 years or so, and they do the exact same job of cutting ribbons and hosting movie nights in their backyard. Like, like, people should look up the president of Ireland. It's literally the same thing as the governor general, but just actually kind of democratic, and his job is just going around with his very delightful dog. It's very nice.
Yeah. I agree. I don't know if in our lifetime, though, we'll see a president of Canada, but who knows?
Honestly, and if people are attached to the name Governor General, we can keep the name. It's just maybe just like remove the tie it has to the monarchy and say, yeah, and just let Parliament pick them, or let Cabinet pick them like once every 8 years or so. Like, I don't care.
Yeah.
Or let the Senate pick them if you want like a degree of separation.
Yeah, that's another thing. Let's talk about the usefulness of the Senate, but that's a whole different
story. At least the senators are appointed by someone who's elected. Like that has democracy in it. Like there's that's different from the Windsors. They're
Yeah, for sure. I think we can certainly agree on that.
Well, all right. Musings on the monarchy and how we should all be Republicans aside. And before we leave that topic, actually, let me just say how much I hate Americans, the American Republican Party, for tainting the word Republican in the English language. Because, like, I want to just say I'm Republican when I talk about the monarchy, but then people think I'm a crazy right-winger because of the American context.
Yes.
There, so, yet one more of America's original sins. Moving on to our second topic of the day, wildfires are raging across Western Canada, in Manitoba and Saskatchewan and Alberta, causing evacuations for roughly about 10,000 people, I believe, at this point. Hundreds coming from each small municipality. It's wildfire season and climate change. There honestly, there isn't much unique commentary to give, because this is just the reality of climate change that I've yelled at people about and tried to warn them about, and said when temperatures get hotter and hotter and you have a bunch of when you have a bunch of trees that are very dry, it and the temperature is hot enough that things can just spontaneously ignite. It, it I don't know if we've made any like recognition of the fact that this is just going to not be just be normal, but it's going to get worse every single year for the rest of our lives.
Yeah, and I think, it's a terrifying reality. Um, and I feel for all the communities that, are placed on 2-hour evacuation notice. That's absolutely terrifying.
Like,
Imagine
and that's the thing, when you know that this is going to be happening to you every year for the rest of your life, how do you live your life being able to pack up and leave in 2 hours? Like,
yeah,
how can you ever establish roots in a home for your family if everything you care about, like your family photos, like has to come with you in 2 hours or it's gone? Like
yeah,
it
for sure.
and like it's what makes me so mad about things like how we were cutting the carbon tax and we're talking about how we need to approve more pipeline. I'm like, this is the cost. I know we've all decided to ignore that because we want to maintain a political reality that that's beneficial uh, for some people, but it this is going to kill people. It's going to kill a lot of people, and there are people who will not be able to evacuate, and they will die.
Yeah, so I'll push back a little bit on that. I don't think the carbon tax was doing very much on climate change or wildfires
It was
specifically.
responsible for about 10% of Canada's carbon emission reductions. And if we are making the link between climate change increasing having a measurable increase on wildfire seasons duration and severity, then anything we're doing to increase carbon emissions instead of reduce them is making the problem worse.
No, but what I'm saying is, having a punitive tax without the infrastructure for people to actually be able to reduce their carbon footprint doesn't actually do anything. It just
Well,
makes life more
that's why
expensive
I'm
and less.
Well, that's why I'm mad. People get mad at me for this. There never should have been a carbon rebate. The money from the carbon tax should have gone into building green infrastructure. Like we, like imagine.
Potentially, yeah,
Well,
potentially,
imagine
yeah.
if
That would have been a much better use for it.
imagine
That's for
it
sure.
like about 50% of flights in Canada are in like the Toronto, Ottawa, Montreal triangle. Imagine if we had just built high speed rail at the beginning of the Trudeau premiership, and then you take all those flights out of the air. Like there's so much we could have done as a country to actually just reduce carbon emissions and make people's lives better with infrastructure if we really wanted to. But we didn't want to. We wanted to do it the cheap way, and now we're gonna pay the price for hubris.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done in order to combat climate change, and a lot of it has to do with actually investing in infrastructure that makes it easy for people to actually make better choices. Um, you know, if you have all of that in place and people are still not um, changing behavior, then we can have conversations about a consumer carbon tax. But
But what
if you
if
live in the
there
GTA,
but what if there won't be any
you live in
political
Mississauga,
pressure
have
to
no,
change those things until there's a consequence for the negative thing?
if you live if you live in Mississauga and you have to drive to get to work, you're not going to ride a bike for 3 hours or an hour and a half to get to work. If you live in some in other areas where you just don't have those choices, I think unfortunately a lot of the time, a lot of policies are made with the um, uh, with the mindset of Toronto or Montreal, and the reality is the rest of the country is not like that.
I'm
The
just
rest of the
gonna,
country doesn't
but what
have.
I would push on is that Mississauga should have built a subway or a metro line decades ago. Much
I don't,
smaller,
don't disagree.
much smaller cities did, and the thing is, if there is no political willingness, and there still is no political willingness, then there needs to be some form of pressure on people because politicians respond to voters, and voters just want the lowest cost.
We're building an LRT in Mississauga, and that's been taking a long time.
It's a streetcar, and it won't even go to square one when it opens.
I agree with that. I just think that these projects require significant dollars, and those dollars should come from provincial and federal governments,
but they also need to come from municipal governments.
They don't have that kind of money.
No, but that's the thing. Mississauga could have that kind of money. It's just that Mississauga didn't want to allow density, and it didn't want to raise property taxes, so it got worse service. And
no, raise property taxes every single year in Mississauga. They've been going up and up and up.
They didn't want to raise them sufficiently to fund the things they needed to build. That is ultimately one of the problems that municipalities have. They do have a revenue tool. They kind of just don't want to use it because there are political consequences to raising property taxes, the same way there are political consequences for federal and provincial governments for raising income taxes. And it does feel like all three levels just want the other one to have the burden of doing the tax increase.
There is a reality to that, but that they do want to, have each other have the burden of the tax increase. I get that, but in the case of Mississauga, our property taxes are quite high, and they are constantly increasing. So I do have to defend my city a little bit there. The reality is infrastructure is expensive, and that is where the investment needs to go. If any party or any government wants to talk about climate change, that's where they need to be focusing their energy on, and housing and more density, and working with municipalities to make sure that red tape is gone, to make sure that more housing is built and there's more density, because to build infrastructure, and especially with transportation, you need to have you need to do that in a proper way to serve as many people as you can.
Valid.
So
there is work that needs to be done. I just think I see no level of government doing any work right now.
I don't disagree with that. That's for sure.
Yeah. Moving on to our final topic of the day, and more exciting and wonderful news that makes us very happy and totally not afraid. British Columbia will not be requiring measles vaccination for schools, despite Canada having the largest measles outbreak it has seen in generations. Nokha, for our no prize question of the day for pointing out the obvious, is it bad for children to get measles?
It is bad for children to get measles.
Congratulations, you have won the no prize. The topic of anti-vaxxer movements and people saying they're not getting their kids vaccinated, it enrages me. Particularly on the conspiracy and the false reports that the MMR vaccine causes autism, which it doesn't. I mean, it makes me upset for multiple reasons. So, one, I'm autistic, and people are saying I'd rather my kid be dead than like you. And it's like I really have no tolerance for people who don't want to get their kids vaccinated. The other reason it makes me upset is I am named after my great uncle, who died during World War II in a refugee camp in Kazakhstan of yellow fever. There was a vaccine at the time, but again, they were poor Jews in a refugee camp in Kazakhstan and the USSR, and they weren't getting the vaccine. So it's like and I mean, we've all seen like people like in like impoverished countries like carry their children on their backs for like dozens of kilometers just to get their kids like these kinds of necessary vaccines. So it enrages me when parents have the audacity to say, no, I'm not going to get my child vaccinated against these kind of diseases. It's such an irresponsible thing. And it comes with a cost of human life, like the lives of children.
Yeah, and I agree with that. I do think, however, the policy to mandate vaccination for schools, I think that's really important. Not necessarily because of anti-vaxxers, because there are exceptions for people who want to get an exception or exemption. It's also for the general public to remember to do this.
Right.
And that's really, really important, because, you know, if you don't, in Ontario, if you don't vaccinate your kid and if you don't provide proof of all the vaccinations, then, you know, your kid gets suspended, and you get a lot of letters in the mail to remind you.
As you should, because it's like how, for those who aren't aware, how herd immunity works is you need a certain percentage of the population to have a vaccine in order to prevent it from spreading and having an outbreak, because vaccines are not perfectly effective at blocking infection. So if you're exposed enough times, eventually one will poke through. But if you have enough of the population all protected, then you limit the amount of people who have an infection to spread, and thus the amount of exposures you receive. And it's also really important because there are a lot of people who can't get vaccines. Children under 4 can't get the measles vaccine. You can't get vaccinated if you're going through chemotherapy because you don't have a functional immune system. Like if you have HIV, if you have AIDS, obviously you don't have a functional immune system. There are a lot of things that can make you immunocompromised that make vaccines work less for you or work not at all. And those are the people who need all of us to go get vaccinated, or like we'll give it to them and kill them. And for measles, the herd immunity threshold is at 95% of the population needs to be vaccinated. And right now, only 87% are. We have dropped too low in Canadians, and there are some parts of the country where it goes down to the 60s based on the region. And this is really bad. Like and it also shows that like vaccines, unfortunately, cannot be an individual choice, because if the herd immunity threshold is 95%, then we can't let people claim exemptions for like stupid things. There has to be like a certain limit here, like for the sake of society's well-being.
Yeah, and schools were a good way to ensure that people are certainly reminded, or are a good way to ensure this, that, you know, people are certainly reminded and they're up to date with vaccines. It's unfortunate that BC decided to go in this direction. Yeah. Surprising too.
I know, because like I remember when I was in grade school, like they would come to our school to do vaccines sometimes, and it was good that they did so. Like our parents were happy that they did so. Like because we had parents that trusted doctors. And, you know, as I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, having just got back from the hospital yesterday after an unfortunate emergency room visit, I am thankful for the doctors and nurses who helped me and got me on my feet, and I trusted their judgment on what I needed to get better, because they have gone to school for this and I have not.
Yeah, for sure. And That's a very good realization to have, Jake.
It's like, mind you, it's like you do want to like know about medical issues or conditions you have. There's nothing wrong with doing your research on those things. And occasionally you do have a doctor or nurse that doesn't take care of you the right way. But remember, folks, a lot of the time, these people are there to help you and take care of you. They are not like a psychopath, like waiting for you to close your eyes. Like please get your children vaccinated.
I second that.
Well, folks, hopefully next week we will come to a world where people in British Columbia are getting their children vaccinated against diseases like measles. And one more horrible fact about measles to scare everybody. Measles can cause immune amnesia, where it can wipe out up to 70% of your patient antibodies. Your patient's antibodies, not so all of like the antibodies you've built up like to protect you from like diseases you've been exposed to in the past, it can just erase those, and then the next time you're infected with them, it's way worse because you have no protections.
Wow, that's pretty significant.
Yeah, so it's again, folks, vaccinate your kids. They're free, and you can get them at any pharmacy. And
great.
if you like this podcast, and if you show me proof of getting vaccinated for any disease after watching or listening to this podcast, then I will give you an official Jake Landau thumbs up and tell you well done. Nokha, thank you for coming on the show today. It has been a pleasure to have you, and I hope we will see you again soon.
Thanks so much, Jake. Thanks for having me.
Nokha Dakroub, everybody. And that'll do it for this week's episode, folks. Next week, we will see you again soon with a new guest who will be very entertaining. And just before we leave, I want to give one final thanks to the team at North York General Hospital who managed to get me all nice and fixed up and repaired and back out to terrorize the masses. So long, and see you again real soon. Cheers. This is the end of the show. Bye.